Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is the new show from Starz Entertainment, all about Claire Beecham, a nurse from 1945, thrown backwards through time to 1743 and trapped in an eerie Scottish castle surrounded by sexy Highlanders and desperately occasionally thinking about escaping back to the magical stone circle and away back to her own time and her nice husband. Episode 4 is called The Gathering, for reasons that will become apparent quite quickly. And in this episode, Claire has been doing a bit of sneaking, she's been leaving some clues around, and she's going to make a break for freedom. She has to get back to the Stone Circle in order to get back to 1945, and to Frank, and to possibly for a chance of getting a little bit more of his Oxford-style under-the-skirt action, back from episode 1. You see, Claire's worked out that this is the perfect time to escape, because the whole castle is far too busy all getting dolled up and making themselves look nice, and getting ready to kneel down in front of Colum, who's even had a shave to try and make himself look a bit more scary and important. And of course, everyone's drinking a bit heavily, because that's what the gathering's about. It's a great big party, and people swearing allegiance, and all that kind of jazz. So after putting everything in action, after having a wee chat with Galus, which is all a bit strange and sinister, like usual, and then, after going into the Grand Hall itself, seeing some people pledging their allegiance, and then getting told off by the woman who wrote the books, "Hiya Diana, yeah, nice cameo." Anyway, Claire gets it all underway. But sadly it's doomed to the start, partly because this is only episode 4 out of 16, so it'd be a bit odd if they managed to tie it up here. But also because before Claire's even out the door, Leary bumps into her, wanting some help with some romance. And then some Highlanders bump into her, and they want some help with some romance, kind of, but in a sort of different, not very nice way. And then Dougal, who saves her from the Highlanders, he's a bit drunk, and then he seems to want a bit of a help with something. Possibly maybe because he seems to have rethought his stance on rape, or maybe just because he's drunk out of his mind. Still, nothing a quick stool to the head won't solve. Unfortunately for Claire, after running the gauntlet of silly little blonde girls, rapey Highlanders, rapey clan war chieftains, she then ends up getting to the stables, and of course she bumps into Jamie, and after talking to him for 2 seconds, ends up spilling the entire story to him so he can talk her down, and then plan to sneak her back into the castle, where of course somehow she'll be safer. But they end up bumping into another group of people, but these ones are actually looking for Jamie, because he hasn't pledged his allegiance yet, and apparently that's quite important. Luckily for the audience, this lets Jamie get the opportunity to take his top off, and while he's chatting away with Claire, manages to spill the fact that maybe his name's not actually McTavish. What's that all about? Sneaky, eh? Maybe not. Anyway, he goes into the main hall to pledge his allegiance, and everyone seems a bit consternationed about this, and it turns out from Murta that this is actually because if Jamie pledges his allegiance, it means he's most likely going to get killed, and if he refuses to pledge his allegiance, he'll most likely probably get killed. But, of course, this is only episode 4, so Jamie manages to make good of it, says something clever, and everyone loves him again, and he even gets a big swallow of whiskey in the good times. With all the hullabaloo settled, the next day Claire decides to go on a boar hunt, where she ends up hanging about with even gruffer than normal Highlanders, all going about, beating drums, waving about bows and arrows and shouting, all to stir up some really badly composited library footage of some wild pigs. Anyway, people get hurt, mainly off screen, and Claire ends up on her own and tormented by an invisible pig that only appears when touched by a magic bullet shot by Dougal. Luckily, the bullet kills it. And then, a man dies in Dougal's arms, and Claire's nice to the man, so somehow that seems to make everything okay, and we don't mind about the attempted rape the night before, and it all sort of makes sense, somehow. On the way back, we bump into Jamie, who's playing shinty. Now, shinty is to hockey what rugby is to American football: dirtier, harder, and scarier, and far more fun to watch. Anyway, Dougal decides to wade in, pretty much eliminating the concepts of zones and any offside rules, and then him and Jamie end up thumping each other until they finally come by some kind of uneasy friendship, because that's what Scottish people do, or at least, well, that's what they do in some parts of Paisley. Anyway, after that, Dougal, Claire, Jamie and a few of the others all ride off into the mist to collect taxes and advance the story, so we'll be coming up on that next week. So what did I think? Well, I thought that the show this week was pretty interesting. I think that they finally got a real good visual style, that they know what they're doing, and they seem to have really hit the nail on the head. And everyone seems much more relaxed than they have been in previous episodes. All the actors have really gotten into their roles. They seem comfortable with the surroundings. They seem okay around the sets and the props. Everything just seems to be going really, really smoothly. So in general, Yeah, I really liked it. I love the costumes. I love the big gathering scenes. I love the fact that everybody looked so nicely turned out. Everything had a really slightly different vibe to it. It's less of the dirty, hairy Scotsman and more Highland prestige and excitement. And isn't Scottish culture wonderful? But with all the good, there also has to be some bad. And the problem I had with this episode is more the fact that this has all been about Claire's escape. She's finally trying to get away from Castle Leoch, and yet she's not really doing much. I mean, her great, wonderful escape plan consisted of giving somebody something to drink so they fell asleep, and then wandering off in the middle of the night past a couple of sentries who we've never seen before. We've got no concept of whether they might have been. We've not seen a planning or putting any of this into action. Once she gets to the stable, she meets Jamie, and in about 2 seconds, she suddenly confessed to her whole escape plan, and he says, no, you don't want to do it tonight, so she gives up on the whole idea right there and then. Now, that would be fine, except that Claire's been built up to be this character who's intelligent, who's more than anyone else around her, who's got her wits about her, who's forward thinking, and yet her escape plan seemed doomed to failure right from the start. It really didn't seem that good, and more than that, it just doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So instead, we've had an episode where the pacing was all over the place because we've got this build up with this great big gathering scene, and then the second half of this slightly limp boar hunt scene that kind of felt a little bit cheap. It was like 5 guys wandering around in a park, waving about, banging drums and going woo, and then a few shots of somebody panning a camera when there wasn't even a boar there, and a little bit of what looked a lot like library footage. Now, maybe it wasn't. Maybe they got a whole bunch of boars and they stuck them out in the forest there and chased them around with some cameras, and then had a whole bunch of guys running around and actually did this amazing thing. But the problem is, it doesn't look like it. It looks cheap. It looks like they ran out of money. Now, that might just be my take on it. But I really feel that it went the wrong way around. The episode probably should have started off with the boar hunt and then had the big gathering later on. I mean, the wee shinty game at the end didn't really tie things up nicely because there was no real end to that. It was a wee bit of a clashing of the wills, but to no real end. Nothing really happened. They fought, they hit each other a bit. Jamie managed to knock him over, and then he helped him up. They looked at each other and walked away. Now, yeah, you could say, oh, this is all building. This is just laying foundations for later on. But I've read the books. I know the foundation for what's later on. And to be honest, it's not really doing it for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed the show, and this is still decent television. But I thought tonight's episode, for all the good, still had a lot of bad with it. And I'm hoping it's going to pick up over the next few episodes when they're actually out of the castle. But anyway, for me, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.